David Ansara of the CRA recently featured in the ManPatria podcast show. In this morning's video, we share with you a brief snippet from the interview where David is discussing universal basic income.
And now, since it's mainly poor people that are getting affected by government inaction and so forth, it seems that the government has a plan to try and revitalize the economy. And they had this development district model, and now they also have universal basic income. So are you aware of any of these programs and plans that they want to implement?
Well, Dumo, I'm a policy analyst and I spend a lot of time reading about government policy, but even I get a bit confused and befuddled by the raft of different policy plans. I think one of our analysts tried to calculate how many grand master plans there had been since 1994, and the list got too long. So we had to abandon the project. But I mean, if you look at the National Development Plan, the IPAP, the Industrial Development Plans, ASGISA going back to the Mbeki years, all of these are these kind of grand master frameworks that try to encapsulate everything in what is essentially a very complex economy and society and distill that into some kind of centralized plan. But I think it's good to be a little bit wary of these grand plans and to just focus on the fundamentals. What are the key ingredients to guarantee prosperity? And these are no secrets. You don't need to be a PhD in development studies to understand these things or economics. These are guaranteeing private property rights. That is a non-negotiable, and currently we're fiddling with the Constitution with Section 25 to introduce expropriation without compensation. So if you want to send a positive signal to investors, just say we unequivocally guarantee property rights, and in any event of expropriation, if you need to build the Gautrain, for example, then we will compensate property owners and your investments will be safe. The other is maintaining the rule of law, ensuring that people are prosecuted if they're guilty of malfeasance. Then we would also recommend reforming the labor market. Currently, our labor market is too rigid. It's very difficult to hire and also to fire delinquent workers. The Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the National Minimum Wage Act, all of these essentially suppress the labor market, make it very rigid and inflexible, and essentially condemn millions of people, about 11 million people, to a lifetime of unemployment and essentially dependency on the state. So that's where this problem, or this proposal, I should say, of UBI comes in. The government says, well, we need some kind of palliative solution for all of these poor people. They don't recognize that, well, actually, if we liberalize the labor market, we would enable more people to actively participate in the economy. Well, they say, well, we need to just solve this with a universal basic income. It doesn't seem like that's been properly costed. How would that integrate with other existing welfare arrangements? And I'm not suggesting that we should do away with all of the current entitlements, but I'd be very cautious about adding another layer of welfare there, and that's not a panacea for some of the fundamental problems that we have in the economy of a lack of labor participation, lack of available skills. These are the kind of the core ingredients that we should be focusing on, rather than these kind of fancy newfangled concepts that are coming out of developed world universities.
Right. And I'm talking about this universal basic income. I mean, it seems that it's an unconditional payment. When I say unconditional, it's not unconditional in the absolute sense, but relative to the other welfare benefits, it seems to be unconditional. And what I've noticed is that given this, won't it create the wrong incentives? Like, it seems to me that once you get your foot in the door and you start paying people amounts of money every month, because they're unemployed and so forth, and you want to help them. Yes, great intentions. We all want to help the needy. But I mean, what's stopping them from asking for more? And then when they ask for more, it's going to cut more. It's going to add more to the fiscus. And on top of that, you're going to have to take out debt to pay for it. And it seems like it's a never-ending cycle of just increasing debt and also trying to help those that have been negatively affected by the very policies that have been implemented by the state.
Yeah, Dumo, I think it's very important that the most vulnerable in society are provided with some kind of safety net. And I think that is an important role to play. But if you're talking about a universal basic income, that is essentially inherent in the name, it's going to everyone. And so what might happen is that people who are on the margin, who might otherwise have been incentivized to look for a job, might be incentivized to not look for a job. And I do think that perhaps that risk is overstated in a way that I think work is not just about income, it's also about your identity, your feeling of value that you're adding to the world. So, I think some of the existing welfare payments for the disabled or the elderly, for example, they are unable to participate meaningfully in the economy. And you can make a case to say, well, they ought to be supported. But if you're an able-bodied young person who has the ability and the will to work, we don't want to put policy impediments in the way that are going to disincentivize them from doing that. And I mean, on the other hand, UBI advocates of it say, well, it's quite streamlined. You can cut down on some of the complex bureaucracy around welfare allocation. Fair enough, but I think if you look at SASSA, I mean, it's had a few implementation problems lately, but I mean, it's a pretty effective welfare distribution mechanism at the moment. And I think libertarian-minded people who are watching this might disagree with me pretty strongly on that. But I think one of my main criticisms of UBI is that it could engender a sense of dependency on the state, that would give the state power over people. And I think a lot of the conversations that are happening, not just in South Africa, but globally around UBI, there's a kind of a fatalistic attitude. Well, the robots are going to take all of our jobs, and there's nothing we can really do about it. And these poor people over here, they'll never really contribute meaningfully. So we must just give them a basic income grant, and they must just be quiet and be thankful that we are giving them these entitlements. So I don't really like the underlying premise of that. And I certainly think you can support people who are most vulnerable and in need, but that's quite different, I think, to what's being proposed with the UBI.
Right. And talking about the fatalistic mentality, it sounds more of like the bigotry of low expectations, really. And it's this message of despair that keeps being preached, and then it's used to fuel these whole UBI schemes and so forth. I mean, I think for me it's a problem, really, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you want to create a robust society where there are more people who are productive and producing, I mean, you're gonna have to do so by allowing people to at least take the risks that they need to take. But it seems that the government we have now, despite their good intentions, they are unknowingly actually taking away the very experiences that make people a bit more, I wouldn't say better, but a bit more formidable, so that they can actually provide for their families and so forth.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, and you can access the full-length interview through the link in the description box below.